Greetings to all, and welcome to the second episode of the new Losing Our Marbles talk show. Today's topic will revolve around sex work and what should and should not, could and could not. That's it. that's the show in the nutshell today. So let's get into some definitions. We always like doing that. We always like getting into some stuff. So let's stuff some things. All right. So sex work. We always like to go with our gut instinct definition, and then we kind of round it out with a couple more globally accepted definitions. It gets into a gray area immediately for me, at least as I see it. Because initially my interpretation would be the selling of your body or images, I guess we could say recordings, in any capacity, voice, picture, video, any recording. And I would say recreational purposes, as in non-essential, but again, it gets into a gray area for me, because to some extent I feel like it can be an essential, right? So it's like I struggled to even define it generally, because I feel like it's overlooked, at least in American society, as an important part of human well-being, right? We usually have the negative connotation of masturbating, which has lately been, becoming a little less stigmatized. But always trying to define someone's social standing by their ability to charm or otherwise sexually engage individuals. It always seems a little weird, if not perverse, in that it's almost viewed like money, right? like it's, rather than a necessity like food or water or shelter, it's viewed like money. Like it's just a thing that deserving people have and non-deserving people don't have, right? And I feel like that's a really bad way to categorize the entire genre of sex. So it's a weird definition to pin down in my mind. So let's go to the almighty oracle, and let's see what's more professional, globally accepted definitions happen to be. We always go to our good friend Merriam-Webster. We'll get on that. Prostitution.procon.org. Well, that's interesting. Who? Is that actually who? If that's actual who, we can check that out. Wikipedia, always a good one. We did Britannica last time. I don't think Britannica is going to be a good one this time. Britannica just goes straight to prostitution. Doesn't even call it sex work. So that's already not a good place to go. So I think we got some good. This is actually the World Health Organization. I'd be interested to see what that definition is. Okay, this is just, okay, this is, all right, this is more disease control in sex work. All right, so let's start with Wikipedia. The exchange of sexual services, services, or products for material compensation includes activities of direct physical contact between buyers and sellers, as well as individual sex stimulation. Sex work only refers to voluntary sexual transaction. Okay, that's a good point. We should definitely put voluntary in there. I like that clarification. That's volunteering. The voluntary. Why? Tell you guys learned so much about me just from me typing. All right, so that's a good distinction. I like that. Yeah, so we should probably, we'll say, I think consensual would be better than voluntary, right? I think that's more encompassing than voluntary, right? Voluntary sounds like people are raising their hands in an audience. Like, oh yeah, I'll do it this time, right? Like, I think that paints the wrong picture. I think we'll broaden that to consensual, right? Okay. Transaction must take place between consenting adults, right? So consenting again, of legal age and mental capacity to consent. All right, so that's an interesting speculation there. So it says, oh right, we forgot we have to do our zoom. Hold on. Aha! Now you guys can actually see what I'm seeing. Maybe one more. There we go. So there's an interesting distinction here where they say, of the legal age and mental capacity to consent. Now, obviously, on from a very base level, that makes sense. But mental capacity also is a bit of an interesting distinction because there are certain European countries that actually have government-funded sexual services for non-mentally capable people, right? So there are people with certain mental disabilities that don't really have the ability to seek out sexual gratification, and there are government-funded programs to address that situation. So it's interesting that is in this definition because I feel like there are exceptions to that, right? Obviously, it would be within consent of whoever the caregiver is if they're not actually capable of giving consent themselves. Whoever is in charge of giving consent would obviously be in charge of that. But I feel like it's a bit of a caveat, small technicality there, I would argue, in that situation. The term emphasizes the labor and economic implications of the type of work. Furthermore, some prefer the use of the term because it seemingly grants more agency to the sellers of those services, right? Due to the legal status of some forms of sex work and the stigma associated with the sex work, the population is difficult to assess. Thus, there's been relatively little academic research done on the topic. Furthermore, the vast majority of academic literature on sex work focuses on prostitution and less on exotic dancing or other forms of sex work. Interesting as well. So, I feel like we're close. So how do we rephrase this then? Because I think maybe just in a sexual manner. Right? Rather than trying to rather than find a term that encompasses the sexual manner, we can just say sexual manner, right? That might be a better way to go about it. Interesting. Let's continue on. Let's see what this website is. Britannica. Oh, it is Britannica. Okay, BritannicaProcon.org. Let's see what is this? Procon.org. So it is Encyclopedia Britannica. Okay. All right, so it's more of like okay, interesting. Well, let's see what we have to touch on here. The terms sex work and sex work have been coined by sex workers themselves for redefining commercial sex, not as the social or physiological characteristic of a class of women, but as an income-generating activity to form of employment for women and men. Or proposed the following conditions as negotiating a performance of sexual services for remuneration. Did they? Oh, remuneration. Okay. With or without intervention by a third party, where those services are advertised or generally recognized as available from a specific location, where the price of services reflects the pressure of supply and demand. Interesting. So that's an interesting distinction, right? So I think this third line, why is it so small? Why you got to be so small, text? There's an interesting third line here, right? Because I think what this is hinting at is that this needs to be a public economic stature, right? Rather than, I think the contrast here would be like a rich guy with a big boat buys a bunch of people to have a party on the boat for a while, right? So that, like, I feel like that is still classified as sex work, but that's not like an employment. Like, there aren't people that would do that full time. It's just that that's a one-time gig kind of a thing, right? So it's an interesting, I don't think it's a necessary clarification, but I feel like it's an interesting clarification because a one-time contract kind of situation compared to a publicly available regular engagement, definitely different categories. So maybe we should have like categorical we should start generating categories. So let's make some categories, shall we? I like where this is going. Okay. So for our categories, we're gonna have I guess we could start with audio recordings, pictures, video recordings, physical, I guess, so there's different levels of this too, right? Exactly, Kira. Exactly, right? So someone who makes a very provocative perfume commercial where they're, naked or close to naked or whatever. I would still define that as sex work broadly. But again, it's an interesting distinction to say that is, right? It's an interesting distinction to say like that's notably different, right? So at least for this one, we're doing like I'm trying to think of the difference, like, so something like a massage parlor where you're just a recipient compared to something like prostitution where it's both parties involved, right? You know what I mean? So I feel like, I don't know if that's a necessary distinction, but that's a distinction that came across my mind. So we'll draw a diagram between physical gratification and mutual intimacy. How about we do that? So we'll draw a line there. Whether that line needs to be drawn. Yeah. So the question being whether or not that needs to be a line drawn, but I guess we'll get to that at some point, right? And then we'll say single contract engagements, right? Can we think of any other forms? Can we think of any other forms of sex work in the current situation, right? I don't know if I can currently think of anything. As far as more categories. But, alright, so let's go back to our definitions here. See how we're... Oh God, I hit the wrong button. My bad. Alright, so let's continue on. Alright, so definition is negotiation, implying the rejection of specific clients or acts on an individual basis, right? And it's going acceptance by the work of all proposed transactions is not presumed. Right, makes sense. So it's kind of the same way of saying it, but saying it a bit more specifically. Fair enough. Let's see what a person whose work involves sexually explicit behavior. Thanks, Merriam-Webster. Yeah. Sex worker. A worker of sex. Thank you for the definition. Real thorough explanation there. Yeah. I thought the whole point of a dictionary was not to use the words in its own definition. Was that not? was that not Okay, there we go. Well, that's an interesting oh, right. Okay, so that makes sense. Right. So, interesting. Prostitute as a verb often used in a negative connotation. Interesting. Right? Now we're talking about stigma, right? So interesting things right out of the gate. I like it. I like it. I kind of like the Wikipedia one the best right now. Anyway. So, I guess another issue we can discuss would be the stigma attached. How do we break that down? It's a fairly large and complex beast. So how do we work that out? Well, yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Like, it's hard to just say stigma, right? Because there's a lot of interpretations and a lot of layers to work through, right? So I'm wondering if, as much as I want to like tackle stigma, we might have to work that out a little differently. We could just say negative American stigma, right? So maybe we'll keep it a bit more localized. Apologies to our international audience. But if there is anyone from a non-American country that has perspective on the matter, that would definitely be welcome in the conversation. So we'll say negative stigma from U.S. I don't know why that's in definitions, but it's there. It's a talking point. We could try to define it. Should we see if we can find some reliable like national surveys? To see what the oh, there we go. See, here we go. PR Newswire. That doesn't seem very. There seems to be a stuff here. The Hill. We'll check out the Hill for now. See if there's any other Yale has, I don't know if this is correct or not, but we'll check on Yale, see what that has to say. Da, da, da. As I know, it's Nevada, right? Nevada has legal prostitution, right? So let's see if we can find something about Nevada. Ish. We'll check that out. There's the state website. We can check that out. All right. So let's look through this. So this is the Hill. See if we can find some credible sources here. This seems like an opinion piece. All right, they've got numbers, but I don't see sources. The report. What is the report? Is this the report? This is like a multi-college level survey. Okay. Okay, great. Okay, seems good. A bunch of stuff. Okay. Okay. I see nothing about the study here. Oh wait, we got some citations. Hold on, wait a minute. We got some citations. Hold on. These are just stories, okay. It says it's a study. This seems a bit more. Okay, here we go. Now we've got, okay. So what happened here? Decriminalization has supported the majority of the voters in a recent survey. 105. Okay, 105. So this is, we'll see what 105 is. There's going to be a lot of numbers at the end of this. Oh my goodness. Data for Progress, YouGov Blue fielded a survey from 2019 in November. Online panel. Survey sample registered voters and was weighted to be representative of the population of registered voters by age. And the US rated 2060%. The sample included 1,000. All right, 1,000 is not a great number, but hey, it'll give us some info, right? So this is 1,000 people we're dealing with, so keep that in mind. Not the best numbers, but we'll look at it. All right, so support decriminalization tech work. It's kind of split down the middle, but favors a little bit towards positive. Interesting. Suburban seems to have a spike for that's interesting that there's a spike for suburban in versus urban or rural for support. That's interesting. I wonder why that is. And obviously the younger generation more than the older. A very strange line drawn there between these two ages of people. Almost like there's a generation gap or something. It's almost like there's a generation gap. Interesting. Okay, so I wouldn't say that's the most reliable thing, but it's something. It is something, right? So I don't know how much more we can read into that. So we could at least put that in our quote unquote definition. Small generational gap. Good to know. Okay. Isn't this fun going through? Can you guys see any of this? I don't know if you guys can see any of this. That's a little better. I don't know why it's so squished. It's like squished in the middle. Okay. 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 All right, so that might be one stigma, I think, that we're touching on here. Sorry if you can't read what's going on. I'm just kind of like browsing through it right now. But it would seem like part of the stigma is requires government regulation funded by taxes, right? That's probably one of the bigger stigmas, right? It's like, I don't want my tax money paying for this, right? So that seems to be one of the issues, mostly, right? And then more along the rights, right? So I guess so. It's hard to embrace the mentality of people against this, right? So I'm trying to think, like, I would think one of the stigmas is like, I don't know if this is true, but it would seem like people are against sex workers having the same rights as any other business or private contractor, right? Which I don't know how you would. Is it a credibility thing, do you think? Do you think it's a credibility thing? Credibility as an independent contractor. Maybe that's part of it. I don't know. Again, it's hard to embrace the mindset of someone against it, honestly. If anyone in chat's against it, I'd be happy to hear from you to get some more insight on the matter. It sounds so weird to say it out loud. So, yeah, I don't want them to have the same rights as any other independent contractor. Like, I don't. That's a weird argument to have. Anyway, let's keep on digging here to see what we can come up with. All right, so this is the paper cited by the previous thing we were looking at. Executive summary. Let's go to page 7. Okay. All right, this might not be quite what we're looking for here. Okay. All right, I don't know if this is quite what we're getting into here. So I'm not sure what they mean by diversion programs. And what are they defining as, what is PDP? Where do they define PDP? I'm trying to figure out. Oh, that's the diversion program. Okay. PDP is the diversion program. All right, so what do they define as the PDP? Okay. So it's they're trying to be like a mitigation between the justice system and the public, right? Interesting. I don't think this is what we're getting into though. But I guess that would be part of the stigma though. Illegality, is that a word? Illegality. It's all good, Ali. We're still establishing definitions, so we're all good. Glad to have you here. We were late anyway, so everyone's running late today. So yeah. I feel like this was what that's really touching on, honestly. As far as trying to define some stigma to define, right? All right, so let's see if we can find some citations here. All right, perfect. I like this. This is a good start. Comparing illegal and legal prostitution, right? And now what's this drawing from? Not sure if that's where we're going with that one. All right, what is this? Nevada brothel list? Interesting. Okay. So they're registered. Okay. Oh, that's another interesting. I glossed over it. So the escort services loophole, right? It's all good, Allie. It's all good. Lugo Vallis, welcome in. Okay. And this is something I was seeing in a couple other sites, is that even with legal sex work, the acquisition of workers does actually get funneled illegally, right? So that's very interesting. Be interesting to see what this 55. All right, so we'll see if that goes into anything interesting. Okay. Okay. Ish, right? Yeah. Interesting. So now there's some very interesting stuff here. Okay, so we're on this paragraph here. So Melissa Dittmore, who's a researcher, usually have some very extraordinary restrictions on their workers, where they separate the workers from the local community, either by forbidding them to leave the actual brothel for a long period of time or requiring them to live outside of the county that they work in. And this is something I did want to actually touch on too, right? So like when we get back into individual rights, there's always this weird like moral responsibility thing that I find is really weird. So like there's the trend online of like finding teachers who have sex work outside of teaching and then they get fired. And I always wondered, like, I don't know if that's right. I don't know if there's any actual morality behind that. Right? There's always that weird line, right? So that might be the biggest stigma, is they want there to be a hard line. Like, these are the prostitutes and then everyone else, right? That seems like one of the more major stigmas, right? We don't want prostitutes who are teachers. We don't want prostitutes who are librarians. We don't want prostitutes who are, babysitters, right? Which is weird. It's a weird thing they don't have anything to do with each other. So I don't, things I'll never understand. But, so that there seems to be a desire for segregation, I guess, is what we're touching on. So illegality, we'll say, I don't know if it's all moral responsibility, but we'll do it separately as a separate category for now. Which is another weird stigma, right? The stigmas are so weird to me. I don't know what I don't understand the arguments against. So again, if you have arguments against and you're in chat, I would love to hear from you, because I'm struggling to see any reason how anyone could be against any of it, honestly. And then so here's more like the downside stuff. So we have discrimination, which is, again, desire for segregation or moral responsibility, right? Power differences between being an independent contractor and being a worker for a larger brothel owner, right? And then more of the regulations being designed to protect the customers rather than the regulations being designed to protect the workers, right? Well, right, Lugo Valves, but I would assume most, if not all, are not using the same name for both, right? And I would also assume they're not advertising their sex work at school, which I guess is one of the fears, I guess, right? If I was in 3rd grade and I searched for my elementary school teacher online, I searched for Mrs. Kelly, I would find an 80-year-old woman with her profile from the school on the school's website, right? I wouldn't find her GILF website, Mrs. Kelly's GILF.com, right? Like, Like, I'm pretty sure there's not a lot of crossover. Now, I could understand, like, a child accidentally stumbles across a video and they're like, wait, I think that's my teacher, right? So I could understand that situation being problematic, but at the same time, if your child is at the age where you're allowing them to browse the internet unsupervised, then I would have to argue that their age is high enough to handle the fact that their teacher outside of teaching is also a sex worker, right? That would be my argument. So, again, it's hard for me to embody the opposition in this argument. So if anyone has insights to that, I would definitely welcome it. But it's just weird to me. It's fucking weird to me, man. I don't know. It's not like it's new, right? Prostitution's been around a while. And the reason it's been around a while is because it's just basic humans, right? It's just basic. It's like farming, right? We have farmers today, and it's not so much people want to farm, and there are people who do want to farm, but it's just people need to eat. So there's farmers. People need to have sex. So there's sex workers. Like, what? Like, what? I don't understand. Anyway, okay, so glad we were able to dive in some stigmas, because again, I have a very hard time like embodying that mindset. So I'm glad we're getting some stigmas here. So it looks like there's a small generational gap in the opinions. Not wanting it to be government regulated because then it's your taxes going to it, that's that same thing where like people are objecting to drug rehab clinics because they will administer controlled doses of illegal substances, right? So if you're a heroin addict and you go into a heroin rehabilitation program, there are some instances where they have the authority to like give you heroin, kind of like with cigarettes, where you back off until you don't have the withdrawal and the addiction anymore. And they can do the same thing with illicit drugs, right? Where like you're having a really bad relapse withdrawal problem, so you get a hit to get you through it, and then keep backing you out of it gently rather than cutting cold turkey, right? And then people are against that, like, well, I don't want a bunch of drug addicts with their lives in the gutter just using my tax dollars to get high. It's like, well, that's not what's happening. Like, yes, if you put on the blinders and go full tunnel vision, that's what's happening. But it's the greater cause is to get them to stop. It's part of the process. You're paying money to help them stop in the long run, right? So that's an interesting thought, Lugo Valos, right? Because, I don't know if you guys are familiar with like the rise of the teenager, but teenagers weren't a thing until the Industrial Revolution, right? Until there was a middle ground of being raised and educated and making a living, that used to never overlap, right? It was you're in school, and then as soon as you can work, you work, right? So if you're in school, you learn to read and write and do basic math, and then get on the farm, right? You can read, you can write, you can do math. Now you can run the farm. So you did enough school, now you're working the farm, right? And if you're a doctor, all right, well, you gotta learn to read and write, you gotta learn how to do math, and then you have to learn chemistry, you have to learn biology, you have to learn anatomy, and then you have to learn medicine, and then you got to go to college, and then, okay, now you're a doctor, get to work, right? But once it became a point where people could be in a middle ground where they were still being educated, but they could also work. That gives you this isolation that we have today, where kids are in school, they have their own money, but they're still living with their parents, but they're isolated in this educational environment for periods of time, either as college students or high schoolers or even middle schoolers, right? And so there's this ability to have independence before you're independent. This like pseudo launching pad environment, right? And what that has done is it has put, as Lugo is saying, that maturity further out, right? So we'll look up some stats, because looking up stats is always good. But the average age of having children has gotten later and later and later, right? Yeah, so perfect here. Forbes is good. I like Forbes. What do we got for citation, though? We always got to check that citation. Advertisement takes up half of the page. Fantastic. gotta love the modern time. All right, so do we have citations? We need... Okay, that's struggling with fertility. Do we have... Oh, good Lord. I hate articles like this. Okay. Costs, blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. 13,000 annually per child. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. Yep. No, this is not going to help us here. Not going to help us here. We need something better. Something better. Why do I like this so much? Oh, here we go. CDC. Let's see what the CDC... I don't know why the CDC is so good at commenting on this. But sure. All right. National Vital Statistics System. Okay, that's why the CDC's got it. Now it makes sense. Okay. All right, so the mean age of others, just in the last 14 years, like not even counting the last 100 years, right? Last 14 years. It's gone up from 25 to 26. All births. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Okay. All right, so it is trending up just in the last 14 years. How about a larger scope? Do we have a larger scope? I need a larger scope. It's all just breaking it down. Okay. Maybe we can find out. Oh, well, that's not going to help. This page no longer exists. See what NPR did. Do they have good citations here? All right, oh, that's much better. Okay, so we're going in the last 40 years now. All right. That's the same one, National Vital Statistics. Okay, good. So we got the same data. So we're looking probably about 5 years later in the last 40 years alone, right? Makes sense. Okay, so, right? Right, yeah. So that's a bigger scope of it, right? So there's this reaching a maturity. The human brain, obviously not fully formed until 26. And then kind of reflecting that is that people want time to go to school, build a career, live life before having the child, right? Because having the child through all that is, a bear and a half, right? So there's the idea of reaching that adulthood, that true adulthood, closer to 26 when the human brain's actually an adult. But at the same time, kind of with like the Facebook thing, where, teenagers are being manipulated at earlier and earlier ages about their about their bodies, how they're perceived, their insecurities, stuff like that, right? So all of those Um, Self-awarenesses are developing at an earlier age, and then the formation of those individuals happens later. So there's this bigger and bigger window of coming to realize it and then maturing through it, right? So it's like, we'll probably say about a 10-year gap. That's probably being generous. It's probably bigger than that. But there's like a 10-year gap. So like somewhere between 14 and 16 is when it starts. And then 24 to 26 when you're actually to that point, right? And it's definitely earlier than that. Let's be honest. It's probably closer to 10 to 12 for most people. But again, let's just say 10 years for an easy number, right? Just say for 10 years for an easy number. So that's another interesting thing as to how that ties into the stigma, right? So there's this, what I'm getting at is that there's this ability to kind of prime, or even, I guess the term would be groom, individuals for longer, right? You have an increasing window compared to the past for this like quote unquote grooming period, which raises a lot of morality concerns, right? So if people are primed at a younger age to be okay with these things, whether they consent to it or not, there's more time for those kind of conflicting moralities to be forced on the individual in either direction, right? So there's a lot more room for confusion in the matter as well, right? So that's an interesting concept to think about, is that kind of gray area between when you first come to realize it and the age of maturity at which you can actually fully embody it, right? And that's just talking biologically. Obviously, each person's going to have their own journey. Some people mature at a very young age, and other people never mature, right? So outside of the individual, there's at least that biological precedence, right? So, interesting concepts. I don't know where we're going with any of this. I'm just having fun diving into the ideas. So I think that's what we got right now. We have sex work as a basic definition, and then all the stigma that you have to work through, right? And I guess we're going to have to get into human trafficking at some point, because that, like, what it would require ultimately is, just like with any other industry, it has to be regulated from start to finish, right? So if you have a small window of it that's legal, and you have this large system of illegal activities feeding it, that's not going to work, right? So there's that requirement to extend the regulation to all of it, right? It's a complicated fucking issue. Yeah, in such poor taste. Wowzers. That's a record hunter's line right there. I would also say there's probably an issue as well, because Nevada's like this tiny little window that's an exception to the rest of the country, right? You're going to have that sex tourism factor as well, right? Kind of what you have in other countries that have the legalized prostitution, right? So it's important to keep that in mind too, is that you can't get caught up in the misconception that there's always going to be these certain problems, because some of the problems are simply generated because of that tourism effect. And if it's legal everywhere, then then that tourism disappears, right? So the idea of like the ratio of customers to workers, the pressure of the economic systems involved, as to like what individuals have to do. Once those supplies and demands are more leveled out in a fully legal system, those tourism problems go away, right? Right, the go Vals. Yeah. So where I was living previously in New Jersey, it's a dry county because they don't want huge parties on the beach, right? Kind of fighting that Jersey Shore stereotype, right? But what it is that all the restaurants are bring your own bottles, and outside the county or outside the township, there is a bunch of liquor stores. So each bridge, when you go across it, there's a liquor store on the other side of the bridge. And so you can bring whatever you want with you, and then that's kind of what you're stuck with, right? And the irony result being that there's more partying that goes on because now people are planning their parties ahead, right? They're not just having a spontaneous party like, oh, let's go to the store, we'll pick up 2 bottles of vodka and come back, right? It's like, oh no, we're gonna need 6 bottles of vodka, 2 bottles of rum, we're gonna need some Malibu, we're gonna need some, right? Like you're right, you've got a whole list, right? And that's, again, that touches on that tourism concept, right? So if it's something that's just widely available wherever you are, then you are going to have a much more casual interaction with the service. Whereas it's like, well, I'm saving up for this one trip to go to Nevada to, go to some brothels. It's like, well, now your expectations are higher. You're going to be looking for more things. You're going to be spending more money on it, right? It's that tourism effect, right? So I think that's an important concept to keep in mind, is that any problem that arises from the tourism scarcity will likely go away. So any arguments in those veins, I would say, would not hold up in the larger discussion, right? I don't know where I'm going with any of this. I just like talking about it. Oh, man. Okay, so don't know there's much else to get out of the legal Nevada stuff yet. I mean, we might come back to this stuff, but that too, Diablo Bob. That too, right? Yeah. Now, this is very interesting. This idea that legal or non-legal, there still seems to be a lot of girls. Now, this looks like it's just one person staying at one situation, and from what we've heard, that this particular brothel is not very good anyway, so obviously women in a bad situation are going to be looking for any escape. But let's go to 41 just to see what that's coming from. Because if drug use is actually something that's oh, good Lord. Where the heck are these references? It says page left intentionally blank, but where are the references? It says 41 and then there's no references. I'm so confused. You can't cite a reference and then not have a reference. What the heck? What the heck? Ah, where'd that 41 go? Okay, it says 41. Where the heck is 41? It's not there. It's just gone. It's just gone. The references are just gone. Well, now we can't attribute it to any of it. But I guess that'd be a stigma too, right? So we'll attach that to illegality, and drug use. So like, it's not just the illegality of it, but its association with other illegal activities. So that's another stigma attached, right? Cool. All right. So we were talking about how even though something might be legal, illegal activities can feed it, right? All right, so this is Nevada. Okay, so this is from Nevada. And the Anti-Trafficking League Against Slavery needed to establish whether or not there was a human trafficking problem feeding into the legal industry, right? So this is in the United States as a whole, 17 to 20,000 people are brought into trafficking. So then the question is, how much of that goes into Nevada? Sorry if it's so small. I'll make it bigger. There we go. Okay. Not seeing any. It just seems more of a story than anything else. This is more like a police publicity announcement, right? This seems to not actually touch on the issue. Which, no surprise! Generating sound bites rather than actually solving the problem. Good stuff. Anyway. Alright, so what we got the apple up here? What are we talking about, the apple Bob? We're talking, all right, so we're talking like taxes specifically on the industry. I think that's fine, right? You have alcohol taxes, you have tobacco taxes. I think sex work taxes is fine. I don't see any issue with that, honestly. And that would probably make it more, I think that would probably make it more acceptable to the general public as well, right? Because then you're reducing how much of the taxpayer dollars is going to it, and it's more funded by the people participating in it, right? So I would say that's only a good idea to have kind of like a sex work tax. I think that would be perfectly fine. All right. So this article is more of a general overview. So let's see what all is here. This is a paper done by the University of Nevada, Las Vegas Department of Sociology. So seems fairly credible. All right, so we have some citations here. Good stuff. Always good to say. Well, again, so the apple above, it's hard to. You have to shy away from those tourism. You have to shy away from the tourism models, right? The idea being you make it universally acceptable, and that tourism factor is gone, right? Um, yeah, I think we'll start dissecting some of these stigmas. I think that's a good way to go for the rest of this conversation. But I don't think Thailand's a good model because that, again, it has that tourism problematic structure to it, right? The whole idea is to make it more universally acceptable so that the tourism factor is eliminated, right? And that's going to solve a couple big problems. It's not going to solve all the problems, but it's going to solve a couple big problems, right? If it's just another thing that's around, then it doesn't have the taboo and the stigma attached to it. It's just, oh yeah, that thing. It's all good, right? So I think that would be a bad way to look at it, for sure. I like to advertise America as the sex worker capital of the world, right? Come to America for all your sex work vacations, right? Like, no. I don't think that's the way to go. Yeah. Just like you wouldn't go to Canada to get alcohol, right? Because you can get alcohol in America, right? It'd be kind of the same thing. So, but it's interesting to see like how the illegal side feeds into the legal side. So that's kind of what I'm interested in right now. So we're gonna kind of dive into that. So we have some citations we can check out. 2006, revenues reached $96 billion, according to a 1998 report. Only 4 countries that report statistics: Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, and Thailand. Nearly 1 million people in the jobs provide sexual service, generating 4 to 13% of the GDP in those countries. So that's kind of what you're talking about with the Thailand model. So that is going to be citation number 5. So let's find out what citation number 5 is. And again, sorry if you guys don't like all of this actual fact checking, but I live for this shit. I fucking live for this shit. All right, so we're going to search for this because this is what Diablo Bob's talking about. So this is the International Labor Organization. Okay. We have full text. Hopefully it's in English. It's in English! Thank God. Imagine it was in Thai. It would be fucked. Okay, cool. So we can check this all out in a little bit. Yay, references! Love these references. Real, actual facts, guys. All right. Anyway, what were we talking about? Where are we at? Okay. 12% of the websites are pornography. Well, we'll take that on face value because it doesn't really matter, but definitely good to note. Global market for mobile adult content grew by 36% in 2008 to research generated $2.2 billion in revenues. Okay. In the United States, retail sales in adult entertainment were estimated more than $12 billion. There are about 3,000 to 4,000 strip clubs that operate from coast to coast in the U.S. That's surprisingly low, isn't it? That's less than 100 per state. Yeah. Interesting. And then 400,000. So there's 3,000 to 4,000 strip clubs employing 400,000 strippers. So there's 100 strippers per strip club, which seems extravagant. So there might be a situation where there's like some big ones and then a bunch of little ones. Now, I don't know if that accounts for turnaround because that says annual. And now I could imagine with how most strip clubs operate. And again, knowing some people that work at strip clubs, they can definitely vouch for this. But there's often that revolving door retail mentality about it, right? So the idea being get as much as you can out of the workers as quickly as possible, and then they quit, and then you find another one to take the place, right? So it has that revolving door retail model to it. Now, in that system, I could definitely see 100 people working per club per year because it may be 25 on at a time, and they last 3 months a piece, right? Or 4 months a piece. So that I could see annual kind of makes sense. And then, yeah, so there's chains, right? There's There's club chains, right? Stream tag estimates that porn makes up 30% of data transferred across the internet. Now that's interesting. X videos is 3 times the size of ESPN. I gotta check that out. And YouPorn's 6 times larger than this. That's number 11, reference 11. I kind of want to see this. This is fascinating. Number 11. Can we go here? I would like to go here, please. Ugh. Great. We did it. Perfect. I'm kind of interested in that, just for the heck of it. We're going to go down so many rabbit holes, right? Fair enough, Kira. So there you go. Another vouch for 100, right? Okay. So it does seem like there's small traction being made. Yeah, the McDonald'sization of sex in America. They're perfect. Reference number 12. I might have to check that one out. Okay, interesting. Horizontal integration. Now, see, that's something I'm interested in. And this is kind of what we were talking about before, like this attacking the stigmas, right? So the idea of attacking the stigmas is this horizontal integration, right? So just like you have your KFC Taco Bell, you could have like a Pizza Hut brothel, right? like and basically it would be like Hooters, right? It would be like Hooters, where you can have the restaurant and brothel side by side in the same business model, right? Would you like red or white sauce with your 1 hour 3-way? But even to just think about that, right? Like having like a sex worker restaurant where you get like a private room and then the sex workers bring you the food, and that's like a whole part of the thing, man. I'd go for it. That sounds like a great time. Anyway, and so here's another thing too, right? So not just government regulation, but also community regulation. So there's already self-established business associations around the concepts. And as you get that more publicized and more readily accepted, you're going to have these naturally growing organizations to help regulate everything, right? So like you would have like the Sex Workers of America approval stamp, or the seal, right? You'd have to apply to the National Registry, and if you meet all the criteria above the basic legal requirements, you can put that little Sex Workers of America seal on the bottom corner of your business, right? So that's another interesting concept, is having this not just government mandated regulation, but the natural order of capitalism, where they will self-organize into these associations to have like an elite, or at least a more generally accepted set of rules beyond the bare minimum legal rules, where it might cost you a little more, but you know everything's being done in a better way, right? So that's interesting too. And that's another thing, I think Kira was talking about this earlier with the licensed and bondage. Exactly. But Kira's talking about this with like the perfume commercials, right? So that's another thing that's really weird to me, is the use of sex in advertising, and even just in media in general, is so allowed and then not allowed at the same time. Like, you gotta have the sexiest people in your big blockbuster movies, but heaven forbid you show a penis, right? Like, you could show people's heads exploding, you could show people being brutally tortured, but don't show a penis, right? Like, but it has to be the sexiest goddamn person on the planet playing that role, right? Like, so that's the other things that I struggle to embody the mindset of, is like, how do you what is that as a moral compass where you can have all of those things coinciding at the same time and be like, yeah, no, it checks out, right? It doesn't make any sense to me. Doesn't make any sense to me at all. But interesting stuff. So we're learning, we're figuring things out, and all good stuff. So I guess the overarching question for today is, should sex work be legalized in America? And then the question being, good reasons for yes or no. Obviously, I'm in the yes camp because no doesn't make any sense to me. But I guess the other half of that is like, how, right? How do we legalize it? What are the true problems to tackle in that thing? And if anyone's against or opposed, I would, again, very much like to hear from you guys to get more insight in that opposed mentality. So, interesting stuff. Well, we were looking at 14. Don't think that's what I was looking for, but okay. All good. So let's check our, this is the Thailand and other countries' sex work report. So we have prostitution in Indonesia, prostitution in Malaysia, prostitution in Philippines, prostitution in Thailand. There we go. 130 it looks like. And then other organized structure of the sex sector. So 138 is what we're going for here. Why do I like digging through stuff like this so much? Oh, that's 138 minus the other things, so we'll scroll down. Here we go. Okay. Perfect. Tourism and prostitution. Exactly what we're talking about. Let's try to zoom in here. There you go. Now you can read along. Yeah, so this is one of the bigger problems, right, that I feel would go away once it's more globally accepted, right? So this idea of sex tourism and concentrating the demand into small areas rather than spreading the demand out evenly on a more global scene, or at least national scene, right? So skimming. Yes. Right, and so that's kind of one of the stigmas we have. So we have credibility as independent contractors, the association with other illegal activities, and then the subsequent desire for segregation, right? So that's right here that you're talking about. So we'll definitely Now, another interesting factor here, though, is that despite being that sex tourism thing, most of the clients for the sex work in Thailand are Thai men. So despite the tourism, there's still a local demand, right? And that's it. So the Thai model is that by embracing and supporting the sex work locally, it makes it more of an appeal to the tourism, which is very weird. That's very weird to me. Right. So that's very interesting that they deliberately support it nationally to advertise to tourists. That's just weird. I think that's completely backwards. Honestly, I think that's a terrible idea, because that goes into kind of that dehumanization, right? Because like now you're looking at them as a product rather than actual human beings, right? So that's weird. That just I don't know how to unpack that one. That's a weird one. So yeah, I don't know. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. All right. So what it's saying here is that, um, and this is kind of why I'm saying this is a bad idea, right? This is highlighting exactly why it's a bad idea. So because they want to advertise it, um, they have to have a certain level of public acceptance to do that. But then when they get kind of lumped into that, like that's all they do, right? Then they have to like fight through legislation to get those negative connotations removed, right? So what it's saying is like, um, there was a English language and culture book published that kind of described Bangkok as like a prostitution uh, center focus, right? And so they had to kind of petition the publishers to be like, hey, we need you to not, we need you to not just label Bangkok as prostitute capital of the world. Like that's not all they do, right? So that's a very interesting concept. And kind of what I was struggling with is, so there's this will to support it, like support its existence, but not take it too seriously for the fear of thinking that's all your country's about, right? And then the problem with that is that because you're afraid of taking it too seriously, so that you're not perceived as that being what you're all about, now you're not doing what's required to make it safe and proper, right? So again, kind of going against that whole tourism model is you have that problem, right? It's just like with Disney World, right? It's you have to take it serious enough to advertise it, but if you take it too seriously, then people think that's what you're all about, and so then you have to have this thing where you're afraid to embrace it as much as it should be, and then you realize like a bunch of horrible things are happening. Right? It's like, oh, right, okay, fair enough. Um, so again, I think that's the important part of this whole idea of like legalizing sex work is that you need to make it as universal as possible so that you're not fighting bad images or bad narratives, so you're not afraid to tackle the actual problems, right? So it's not a straightforward situation of like make it legal, make it illegal. It's a very systemic, overarching regulatory nightmare. And that's part of the problem, right? Is convincing people to put the resources necessary to change it in order to change it. It's a big investment, right? So, interesting stuff. And this one was just the size of porn sites, which is very interesting to me individually. I don't think there's actually anything to see here other than whatever this is. Does this even have sources? This is just... Where are your sources? Where are your... What is this? This is just an image. This is bad data, ladies and gentlemen. Study up. This is not good data. This is bad data. There's nothing here. There's no sources, no links, no nothing. This is not how you report. They've got all these numbers, and I can't check any of them. Bad internet. Bad internet. Bad. Maybe that's one of the emotes we need for the channel. We need a fact-checking / bad internet. We need like a wagging finger at a picture of the internet. That's what we need. That's what we need. Anyway, okay, so where do we go from here? That's the question. Where do we go from here? Like this? All right, so let's establish basic argument number 1, which is, should it be legalized, right? So let's stick with the categories here. We got our categories. And we'll do like a legalization yes no kind of a thing, right? Ah, what the heck? Oh no, don't do that. Actually, so we can make like a table? Okay, interesting. Can we extend this table to be everything? Interesting. I kind of like this table idea. How do we delete? Yeah, delete that. I want that. We'll put all this in here. Oh God. No, this is gonna take forever. Okay. Oops. All right, there we go. Now we're getting there. Okay. Are we good now? We're good now. Okay, great. Cool. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do like a yes/no thing here. Okay. We'll go by general consensus. All right. So, kind of what's already legal right now, right? Audio recordings are legal, right? Pictures, legal. Video recordings, legal. With there is some restriction. Like there's some things you can't show. I guess, is that true for pictures as well? I don't know if there are any limits on, like, obviously there's legal limits, like you can't have child pornography, but that's just across the boards. But like videos, I think there's certain things you can't show, usually like violence related. Like there's certain levels of violence that you're not allowed to show on that, right? Physical gratification is not, this is like a maybe. This is kind of that hush hush. And then we have no on physical intimacy, and then single contract engagement that's again kind of a maybes, right? So escort services are kind of those single contract engagements, and that's that maybe situation. So that's the current standing right now as it is. I'm going to take a quick break. But what we're going to come back is like why these lines exist and then where those lines maybe should be drawn. So that's what we're going to formulate our discussion on. Now that we've spent an hour and a half just going through definitions and researching general information, we'll take a quick break and then we'll come back and kind of explore why there are these lines where they are and whether they should be there or not. So form some opinions and thoughts on the matter in this brief moment, and we'll be back. Okay, are we ready to do this? I think we're ready to do this. All right, so most audio recordings, I think audio might be the most lenient, at least in this country. And you get to things like that even with like YouTube, right? And even Twitch, right? The things you can say, a lot more, there's a lot more leniency in that for audio compared to video, right? So perfect example, there's like storytelling on YouTube where the people will be like reading erotic stories, right? Where if you were to make a video depicting what was being described, YouTube would not allow that video. But yeah, I got you, Diablo Bub. I got you. But so it's you're allowed to describe those scenarios verbally, but you're not allowed to visually represent those scenarios, right? On something like YouTube. And then same thing with Twitch, right? They're pretty strict on what's visually allowed, but not nearly as strict on what content verbally is allowed, right? So even just that principle alone to me is a little weird, right? And that's often culturally disguised with euphemisms, right? So advertisers for TV networks don't want you talking about certain things, but allows you to allude to them, right? And that kind of extrapolates into the more blatant, you can say the words, but you can't do the words, right? Now, I don't know if that comes into more the American ideals of freedom of speech, right? Like, I don't know if that's what it stems from. I'd be interested to see what people's thoughts are on that argument. But That's kind of what it feels like to me a little bit as to why that line is even there. Why you can describe things, but you can't do the things you're describing. Seems like that comes from a freedom of speech kind of a situation. So, I don't even know why that line exists. I can't even get past the first yes. Right? Because even some things as ubiquitous as YouTube or Twitch already have weird lines drawn, right? So, I don't know why you should be allowed to talk about it but not do it. For me, it should be either a hard yes or a hard no, right? But it does seem like audio recordings do have the most ubiquitous acceptance. And that's probably just because of both that euphemistic referencing and also that American freedom of speech mentality. I mean, I guess, Kira. And that's more in the lines of like, you know, those multi-layered shows like Ren and Stimpy, where children just see people being goofy, but adults watching know exactly what's going on, right? But even with something like Ren and Stimpy, that's strictly visual, right? That's not really a distinction between audio and video, in my mind. That's more that's just content, period, right? I'm specifically talking divisions in content, right? So the level at which you could describe a sexual situation on YouTube versus the level on which you could visually portray a sexual situation on YouTube are different, right? So I don't know if that goes into a over the children's head situation. It may be less appealing to children because it's kind of in that same vein as reading, right? Like, why would you read when you can just watch a movie? Like, why would you listen to an audio when you can just watch a movie? Kind of the same thing, right? So to me, that's more of a separation of that kind of a level. But still doesn't make sense to me. That doesn't make sense to me on those lines, I don't think. So yeah, I don't know why there's even a line there, but being able to vocally describe things, I guess, tied into the American freedoms and freedom of speech, it's allowed, which, you know, great. Now pictures. So pictures, I guess there is some limit to pictures as well. So I mean, true, Diablo Bob, but again, you can go beyond innuendo with audio recordings, right? You can practically describe a sexual situation verbally and post it on YouTube, whereas you cannot show a sexual situation on YouTube. And so maybe there is a bit of a line, right? So you can describe what's happening without using words of genitalia and the actions involving the genitalia, kind of like you can show a video that has where like people are having sex but it's not showing anything, right? So I guess there are those lines, and I guess you could equate that, right? So a verbal account that doesn't specifically mention certain things but still describes the situation could be equated to like a PG-13 movie compared to an R movie showing a sex scene, right? So you would still have a sex scene in there, but It's more of what you're showing of the scene, right? So that makes a bit more sense, I guess, in that regard. There's kind of a layer of censorship as to how it's approached, right? So that makes a bit more sense. Now, pictures, there's no real limit on pictures other than like straight legality, like, you know, children pornography or bestiality or necrophilia, right? So as long as it's a consenting, of age, living participant, there's really no limit on pictures. It's if you know what sites to look at, you can find pretty much anything. You could probably even find illegal stuff as well. So pictures and audio seem to have the most leeway. And then so you get into the video recordings where there is some limit. There are some acts that you're not allowed to show that aren't. It's not that you're not allowed to show them because the acts themselves are illegal. It's just showing those acts has been deemed illegal. And it's usually in the more violent category, from what I know. But still, all those things are allowed. So I guess the separation that exists right now between these two categories, right, is this stuff is kind of unscripted and harder to account for, right? Whereas this stuff is much more easily regulated, right? So your audio recordings, your pictures, your video recordings, it's very simple. There's a hard copy, indisputable of what occurred, and either it is or is not allowed, right? Whereas when you have stuff getting into the more physical customer sex work, you know, now it becomes hearsay unless you're requiring it to be recorded, in which case you have a lot of privacy issues. You're going to have red tape all going through, right? And then that's where you get into a lot of these problems where, you know, is human trafficking occurring or not? Well, it's harder to tell, right? And even still with basically the porn industry, there's still a lot of situations where people are being taken advantage of. You know, contracts are left ambiguous. Companies advertise themselves at less severe levels, so maybe they just advertise themselves as like a photography modeling agency, but they actually do porn, right? So it does make sense in the current system as to why these lines are here, where these top three are a lot more readily accepted than the bottom three, because it's stuff that's much more concrete and therefore much more easily regulated, right? So I guess we could draw the line between these two as where's my drawing? I just want to draw a line. I want to draw a line because I can. Perfect. Feels good. So I guess the line just becomes with a good being sold and a service being provided, right? So that line, it makes sense based on the current system. But then the question is, should that line exist? And I would argue no. Wondering what some other people's thoughts are on the matter as to where lines could and should be drawn in this situation. We should probably have another load overlay also. We need an overlay where these two are switched, right? We wanna duplicate this. I'm thinking about it. So what we want to do on this one is we want this to be larger and this to be smaller. Aha! There we go. And then that needs to go above that. Ta-da! Alright, we got some ideas in chat here. Cool. Alright. We can actually raise that up a little bit. Perfect. Okay, so got Kira. If legalized, it could be safer for the workers, take some power away from the possible abusers, and could probably improve the economy. I agree with all those points. Galbava has been on the mindset of a person's body as their own business and should only be legislated as it pertains to your choices or actions when it affects other people. See, and so that's another thing too, right? So that's a great point, Galbava. I like it. Right? If I go out to a bar and buy someone a couple of drinks, and then we go get some food, and we go see a movie, and then we come back to my place and we have sex, and it's just a one-night stand, and then, you know, we never see each other. Like, how legally that's prostitution, right? It's not like a contractual prostitution, right? But at the same point, it's kind of that, like, buying it in a way, right? And that's not to say it's non-consensual, right? But it, like, it's on paper, it's the same thing, right? Like, how is it any different than going out on a date? Like, how do you even prove that? How do you even describe it as different? Where, like, I can't just pick someone up in my car, pay them some money, and they have sex with me. But I can go to a bar, buy someone some drinks, buy them some dinner, go to a movie, and then they have sex with me, and that's okay, right? Like, it's a little weird, right? Definitely some gray area in there. And again, that kind of goes to my mindset of, like, it's such a long established basic profession. Like, it's not very much integrated. It's the same thing, right? Like, if I grow tomatoes at home and then I sell those tomatoes to my friends, I don't have to collect taxes on selling those tomatoes. I don't have to file with the USDA as an agricultural business, right? I can just sell my tomatoes to my friends, right? So to me it's the same lines. Like, there's a weird gray area between selling tomatoes to your friends and being a tomato farmer, much like there's a weird line between going on a date with someone that ends in sex and actual prostitution, right? It's not just it's this or this. The smear is pretty even all the way throughout where those lines get drawn, right? And exactly, that's another thing, Diablo Bob, is what if it's incidental? You know, what if I helped you out with your bills one week, and then the next week you helped me out because I was feeling lonely, right? So it's weird to have these lines drawn in an otherwise spectrumed situation, right? There's this whole spectrum of situations, and then the government's just like, nope, that's the line. And it's like, is it though? Is it actually a line? Or are you just pretending there's a line, right? So, and that's what's really weird about what we have here with our current setup, right? Is that the one thing that is the most common, in my opinion, is the one that's the most harshly regulated against, right? Right, but, you know, I would imagine most prostitutes are not signing contracts. At least the illegal ones. Right. Right. And so there's a pattern outside of it, right? And again, coming to like the lines between farming and just selling tomatoes to your friends, like it's your percent income, right? If your percent income is mostly you selling tomatoes to your friends, then that has to be registered as a business, right? If it's over 25,000 a year, you have to get that registered federally, right? And then yeah, same thing like car, right? So there's like how much money per year are you making doing the thing, and that's what they use to draw the line, which is, you know, still weird, right? But to me, it's weird because, in my opinion, this is the most frequent, is this mutual physical intimacy, and that's the one that's most outlawed outright, right? So with like a massage parlor, you have this gray area. With escort services, you have this gray area, like these loopholes. But with the mutual physical intimacy, it's just hard no, and that's like, in my mind, the most common one, which makes no it doesn't make sense. So, in my mind, that's very weird. I don't get it. I don't get it. I say they should all be yes, in my opinion. I think they should all be yes. So I don't even know what, I guess it's weird. I don't know why those gray areas exist. It seems completely backwards to me. I don't know how else to address it. But yeah. I guess there's one other concept, right? To kind of see if there's a parallel here, right? When we look at, so let's look at movies, right? Movies and TV shows. It got to a point where movies were so expensive and so hard to come by that people just started pirating movies, right? The hassle of renting, the hassle of going to the theater, all this stuff. It became too much of a hassle, and then you saw an increase in pirating of movies. And then the market adjusted, and you got movie services like Netflix, and then pirating went away because now there was a as convenient, if not more convenient, way to achieve the product or to acquire the product than doing it illegally, right? But then you get into the point where there's so many subscription services. Like now there's not just Netflix, but there's Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, et cetera, right? There's so many now that it reinforces that idea of like, well, the one thing I want to see is on one subscription service and the other thing I want to see is on the other subscription service. And that inconvenience is getting bred back into it, right? And then you see a rise again in pirating. And I wonder if there's a parallel to the sex industry with that, where when you make it outright illegal, then a lot of people are going to do it illegally because it's just easier to acquire illegally. And then you can make it legal, in which case you'll have a lot of customers concentrated into the small avenues that are legal. And then is there a situation where when you broaden that legality, that another avenue of illegality becomes the preference of the customers, right? Maybe that's related to the sex trafficking, in that in order to maintain supply for a more large demand, it becomes very attractive to purchase from sex traffickers rather than taking the time to find people that are willing to do it and negotiating for hours and number of jobs per week, et cetera, right? So maybe that's the parallel there with the human trafficking side of things. But I'm also wondering on the consumer side of things, like, is there a situation where people want the experience outside of the regulation, right? Like if it becomes too corporate, too sterile, too impersonal, then the gratification people are looking for, they don't find. And then they start trying to find more real situations to find that gratification. And then that kind of repurposes the illegal way of going things, right? So I'm wondering if that's one of the situations there is like, exactly, Kira, exactly. So that's what I'm wondering is like, is there a parallel there between kind of that media consumption when you have these stages of the customer base prioritizes legality and then illegality and then legality and illegality as the market tries to keep up with the convenience of the service, right? Is there a convenience of service issue that could arise from the more corporatization of sex work, right? I guess you can kind of see it now. I guess so. One parallel, right? Right. The one parallel I'm seeing right now, right, is that you still have this thing where like celebrity nudes get leaked online, right? So rather than paying through the services that would allow you to see those things in the intended way, or even with someone who normally is not willing to engage in the sex work in that way, people seek the illegal ways of obtaining it, right? I think that's might be one parallel. Like, would there be an increase in this? I don't know if I would describe it as a pressure, but like, would it be this thing where it becomes an expectation? Like, oh, you're a celebrity, you should have an OnlyFans. Oh, you don't have an OnlyFans, well, then we're going to hack your phone and find whatever pictures we can, right? Like, maybe that's a downside that comes out of that, where when the privilege becomes an expectation, you could have these negative fallouts. So that might be one argument against, which is a very minor argument and very easily routed, in my opinion. But That's where I'm at right now. I don't know. You guys have any contributions on this? As to why certain things are legal and illegal, gray areas, and whether they should or should not be. Right, Diablo Bob, right. Yeah, there's a sensationalism to it. And like it's not the best parallel, right? Because the more accurate representation of that for movies is like if an actor accidentally leaks a detail about the movie that hasn't come out yet, or they show a poster image for a poster that hasn't come out yet, right? So I think that's more in that line of equating, because that's not strictly within the category of sex work, right? Like I said, it's more of a fallout, because that's an invasion of a person's privacy. That's not inherent in sex work, right? That's just a negative fallout of what could eventually happen, right? And that's just, in my opinion, that's easily confronted. You just more heavily pursue and persecute the violators, right? So if you leak their images or you're sharing or spreading the leaked images, you're held liable for the privacy violation and you get taken to court, right? So I think that's something that would be more easily solved, and I think is slightly outside the realm of sex work itself. But if anyone has other contributions or insights to the topics at hand, would be very interesting to hear those opinions. Or anyone in the industry who might have some thoughts on the matter. That would be cool too. Right. As I said, it's kind of outside that vein, right? That's not so much legalizing sex work and the illegal ramifications of doing so, but more so just something illegal that happens that's loosely associated, right? So yeah, I don't know. I had fun diving into this conversation. Seems like we've learned some things and thought about some things and taken it to heart. So that's where I stand on the matter. Unless anyone else has any other contributions to make, thank y'all for watching. It's been fun diving in, getting our feet wet. We're still kind of figuring out the true format of the show, so trying to find ways to get people more involved, and maybe having some guests on with counter opinions would be interesting as well. So we'll keep seeing what we can formulate with that. But I'm having fun just digging through this stuff, even if we don't actually say anything in the end. Just learning things, putting things into context. There's some interesting stuff from Penn and Teller's BS. There is. I mean, take it with a grain of salt. There's some very heavy libertarian overtones to that show, which I don't agree with most of the time. But they make some good points. So maybe we could take one of their episodes and break it down a little more. That could be good for a show. So I think that's where we're going to put it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for watching. Again, if you have any contributions to this, feel free to post them in the Discord or comment on the YouTube video. If you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to have a discussion in the comments. I'd happily participate. And we will carry on with this next week. See what topic we want to go for then. I know there have been some recommendations for topics. I think an easy one that would be fun to have backs on would be like flat earth, tackling the flat earth bullshit. Low-hanging fruit, I know, that we've done many times, but it would be fun to do that. See if we can find a flat earther to come defend some points. But all sorts of stuff we can get into. So yeah. If you have any suggestions for either people or categories, topics to get into for the next week, feel free to post those in the Discord. And we'll see you next time. Bye.